So you have your data, now what? Um, so there are a couple of places where your data lives in the platform, right? One is in the analyzer, and then the other is where you can like export it, right? So that you can kind of see the raw numbers and the what's kind of driving the maps and the graphs in the analyzer. And so when you download your raw data, there are a number of tabs. And so I'm gonna switch over to our kind of the live version here and kind of go into what I would call our project here. Sorry. Each time I log in, it will have me log in every time, only because we do have some security features around timeout access. So just bear with us when we do that. But when you log in and you see your project, you will either see it under your project or you will see it under a collaboration, depending on how you have access to that project. But when you go in, you will easily be able to export your project data, and you can export that at any time. And since the survey, when you launch it, you can collect it after the first response, you can collect it or download it every week if you want to kind of see, keep a handle on kind of how the data is, shaping up, right, as the data collection is moving on. But what's great about this raw data is that we put it in such a format that you're able to do a lot of different things with it. And so one thing that I might say is we might offer another workshop around just using your raw data and how to maneuver and do different things. But for the sake of this workshop, I'll just quickly go through and just give you an idea of what's located in each sheet within your Excel document. So when you download, you'll have a non-relational tab, and this is all the data for any question that did not involve like a partnership. And so these are downloaded in ways that you can easily sort, you can easily average, and you can easily take this kind of data and put it into another stats program like SPSS or SAS or anything like that as well. So we wanted to make it easy for you to use this data. You can also kind of import the group in here or any kind of attribute as well, and then sort the data by that way. And then you can really kind of look at the themes across different groups. So we can dive into that in a different workshop. But right now in the relational tab, you have your head and your tail data. And so it's kind of confusing when you look at what's a head and what's a tail. And so the head is the respondent. So anybody who answered the survey is going to be shown up as a head. And anybody who they chose as a partner is going to show up as their tail. And then this is kind of their how they answered all the relational questions about them. And again, we set this up in a way so that you can easily sort it. One thing that we like to do sometimes is, take this awareness question or this level of intensity, sort by that, and then look at what kinds of activities are members who are just aware of each other working on together versus those who have integrated relationships, right? So there are ways to kind of cross tab your data and really dive in deeper. And at the node level, at this dyadic level, you really see the intricacies of each relationship, right? And you can sort by the tails. And what's really great about that is then you can see members' perceptions of a specific partner. So some things that we typically will do is we'll say, okay, this is how this partner perceives their relationship. Now, do their partners perceive them in the same way or similarly, right? Or what are the differences, right? And so really, you can really dive down into that dyadic level of which about what these two partners are specifically working on. And these are coded by what we call a short name. And the reason it's a short name is because they show up in the network maps as well. And if it's the long organization name that's kind of over here, it will be kind of really hard to see that in the network map. So we try to make it really easy so that it's identifiable in a way if you want it to be, but you can also de-identify it if you have a large network. There are ways after the fact to change short names and to change how you identify members in the map as well. So those are all kind of settings that can come later. Your open-ended data, if you ask any open-ended questions, it all kind of gets filtered into this tab. Survey codes is where you can kind of go and say, well, what did we ask in question 2? I don't remember that. I don't want to have to go log back in. All that information is right here. And so you can kind of see which questions you asked and the responses for that. Alter network. This tab won't really be relevant for CPRM kind of work. This is more for our partner me work when we're kind of having nodes at an individual level connect relate like people who they know work or who they know coordinate care for them. So this tab will probably always be empty for you. So just note that there's nothing missing. It's meant to be empty. And then this matrix tab is set up the same way as the non-relational tab. But you can see here that you can see the question and then you have different, like the responses are kind of here. And then you have, you know, the different rows down here and then your columns, you know, show up kind of here as well with the zeros and the ones. You can always kind of tell when it's a response option if it has that 0, 1, right, distinction with that.
Hey, Sarah,
yes.
would you mind giving me a quick high level of what cross-tabbing your data means?
Oh yeah, I apologize. Cross-tab data, how we refer to it, is this kind of like taking one data point and then also looking at within that data point, like taking another, I'm trying to, I guess a better way of saying it is taking 2 data points and looking at them together and seeing if there's similarities, or just kind of grouping data together by like an attribute or by like how they answer a question. So in this case, we would group them by how they answer this this intensity question, and then we would look at the types of activities they did together. We typically show these in tables, and if you're interested in learning more about cross-tabbing your data, please reach out to us. I'm happy to kind of dive into your data set with you personally and kind of show you or show you how you can kind of maneuver through that as well. So any other questions, please, yeah, jump in and let me know. And then we are gonna head over into the analyzer is the next piece, right? So all of that raw data feeds the analyzer. So anything that's in that raw data sheet is also in the analyzer as well. And so you have different features that you can access within this one section of the platform. You've already kind of entered your members, done your survey, and sent out your survey. So now it's really time to kind of play with your data. Use it, as you see fit, weekly if you're going to meetings. And the analyzer is the place where you, I think, will spend most of your time doing kind of that information. Oh, sorry. So now I'm going to go back into the live portion again, and I'm going to go into the analyzer. And I don't think it's going to log me out. Yay. Okay. So in here, there's a couple different tabs up here. So real quick, I'll just go kind of backwards because we'll spend most of our time in the network map area. You have your charts and your graphs. Here you can look at any of your data with a pie chart or a column chart, pie chart. We are working on updating our analyzer. So in the next, I would say, year, this section will also have some updates coming soon. And then you have some different data network scores. This is where you will find individual level scores as well as your network level score. So we have a few scores at the network level, like density, which is just how, like the percentage of how many of the connections that are possible have been reported. And that number is dependent, right, on the number of respondents as well, because if you had 100% response rate, then that density score will be 100% reflective of that. But so taking into account what the response rate is for the network, and then the density score plays into that. And then if you included value or trust metrics from VNL, then those also show up here at the network level. The individual level, though, this is again where I think you would spend a good amount of time. This also kind of just summarizes a lot of what data is in the relational tab of the raw data, except for the relational questions, but it has the score pieces and it summarizes that piece for you. So what's really nice here is that you're able to kind of sort by individual level scores of their total value or their total trust or different value or trust metrics. But we also have some network level scores as well. So what we have called degree centrality. So this is the percentage of partners that this organization is connected to in the whole network. And then you have what we call an in degree and an out degree score. So when you think of in degree, think of all the partners that are coming into them, and then out degree of all the partners they selected. So when you sort by these numbers, you'll notice that some people will have zeros for out degrees because they didn't answer the survey, so that they didn't select anybody if there's no outgoing relationships that they reported. And then you can kind of see here, if you sort by degree centrality, this is where you're going to kind of identify those key players. And I know that was kind of mentioned in a couple of the intros. So this is the degree centrality score is actually kind of our key player score. And so when you look at this score of 72%, we know that this organization, this behavioral health group 1, is connected to 72% of this network. So they are what we would consider a key player. And then you have folks who might be down here who are only connected to one other organization. Now, again, they did not answer the survey. So this is only what's been reported, but that also is really important because you want them. Oh, go ahead, Caroline. You raised
No,
your hand.
please finish your sentence.
Oh, I was going to say, because at that point, you just want to, anyone who's kind of at the bottom there, or if they have nobody they're connected to, it's a risk of being an isolate of the network. And so if they didn't answer the survey and they're a key partner, you can encourage them to, hey, the survey's technically never closed, right? Your data is living in the platform. It's there for you to pull anytime. But if you see this childcare 1 and you say, I know you're a key member of this network and I want that to be represented in our map. Can you please answer the survey? That number might change, but maybe they're not really an active member and maybe this really is reflective of their participation in the network. And so that gives you some insight, right, into how you can approach that organization and how you might want to either bring them more into the network or say that's okay, right? That level of participation is okay for what we need. But go ahead, Caroline.
One thing that I was trying to make sense of a little bit when I was looking at individual organizations' trust and value scores is like, how many people is this response based on? Like,
Yeah,
is it one
question.
person that responded? And so like, I'm just trying to make sense of the caveats. So it sounds like that if it's 0, it means the entity didn't respond, but then is the N basically the in degree?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So for this organization, 30 partners chose them as a partner, right? And then they chose 35. So they are pretty, pretty up there in terms of like their key player score. But then you can see here that all of those players on average, or all those members, excuse me, on average, rated them highly. They value this member. They trust this member. Something that's really interesting that we'll do often sometimes too is sort by the total trust and the total value. And you'll sometimes see that those who are most valued sometimes aren't the most trusted, right? And so that can get really interesting. So you can, we sometimes will line them up side by side and kind of see like, okay, this organization was rated highly on trust, but they're like 5th on, value or whatever it is. And so then you can kind of see like how the perceptions change a little bit because, sometimes those who are powered influential maybe aren't the most trusted, or maybe they're not the most reliable, right? So like there's some nuances, right, between individual relationships. And so you can also see that in the raw data as well. It's a little bit more like work in a way, but if you sort by that, if you sort by your tail, here and say we wanted to look at this organization, right? And everybody who selected them, I would go down to that relational question, and you'll see that sometimes people skip questions, right? Or
Yeah,
sometimes they don't
okay,
answer
that's
about it.
helpful.
So it's not quite always that same N. So if you really
Right.
wanted like the true N, you can go here and then you can kind of sort by the specific columns and, and kind of figure out, who didn't answer, right?
And that's
And
super helpful because I think some of our partners who want to talk about their profile and their scores,
mhm,
they might have questions. Well, like how many people is this for? So I just wanted to know
right,
where I
yeah,
figure that out so I can be prepared with a response without
yeah.
disclosing who responded.
Exactly, right. Yeah, that's a very important point too that you just made, is because these scores too, are meant to kind of be held at like a network level or like with a steering committee or with those who not necessarily like you can share out what those who reported about them. But just know, like you said, with the caveat, if one person picked them and then that's their score, then it's kind of obvious like who maybe gave them that score, right? So there is like some considerations to take around the trust and value scores, but we're happy to kind of talk more like through that with you if you have concerns or want to talk about what concerns your members may have about those scores. Because there are positives about identifying certain aspects of growth, right? Opportunities for growth, right, is a good way of approaching it with folks. Cool. So then your GIS map, this is where if you added in addresses, you're able to kind of map that out. This one is kind of mapped out for our demo in Montana, and it's loading at the moment. But if you didn't have addresses loaded initially, but you would like to add that later, that is something that you can update in your members area, and you can edit your members and add in address information as well. So apologies that my GIS is being a little sassy here, but you do have the same kind of data options that you do in your network map. You're able to kind of show different relational questions, and then you're able to color nodes by different attributes as well. Sake of time, I'm just going to move on to network map because I was having GIS trouble earlier. I think it might be an ArcGIS thing possibly, but we'll see. But so this is your network map. And so there are a lot of data options, and I know it can get really overwhelming, right? So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to reset all my options, and I'm just going to go into this map. You'll see here that these are relational questions, and you have the option to show the map with any of your relational questions. So anything that shows up in that relational tab of your data, this is where it's going to visualize, right? Any line between nodes are relationships that were reported. So anywhere, I'm going to go deselect all of these for right now. And so say I wanted to kind of look at like a new advocacy or policy initiative. And so I'm going to kind of pull up, who's my policy network? Where's my policy network? And so I see, oh, okay, here's all the folks who said that they work on policy together. And then I want to go down here and I say, well, we asked about what they can contribute to this network. So I really want to say, who can contribute advocacy to, to the work that we're doing, to this new initiative. And so then you can come here and then you can say, oh, okay, then you can kind of really start diving into your data. So all of these lines, again, represent the relationships between organizations. All of these halos represent if they answered kind of one of those non-relational questions and how they answered. And so you can, if I wanted to change that to say, well, actually, who gives funding? Because we need money for this initiative, not, that's what we really need. You can go back and say, oh, okay, good. Look at these key players who are connected to so many people who have funding opportunities. I'm going to tap into, them, and I'm going to see, how we can bring them into, into this work in a different way. And so one thing you can do with every node in your network, if you click on them, you can get a little box these are kind of like we call node level details. From here, you can see kind of basic attribute information about them, their address, also some score information. And then you can also quickly jump right over into their member profile. I won't do that right now, but you are able to like quickly go into them. So if you're like, I want to know more about them and how they answered the survey, you can quickly get over to their member profile. You can also change different settings and filter. So if you also just wanted to say, okay, well, who within my policy network, but who's the ones who are my nonprofits and my early childhood? Those are the ones, it's really going to be focused on those two main sectors for this initiative. And so now you narrowed it down and you filtered your data by even more information. And so you can really kind of get a handle on like different stories that you want to tell with these maps, right? You can choose to show arrows. I always like to show arrows because it shows that directionality of who said who, right? Because it's really interesting that this relationship is reciprocal because both arrows are going towards one another, right? Sometimes it may not be reciprocal because maybe they didn't answer, but so there's nuances, but any questions? I might have heard someone come off mute. Feel free to interrupt and ask questions. You can also, apologize down here, I forgot to, you can color your nodes also by different attributes as well. So if I wanted to color them by org type, I can also filter that same way up here. So if I'm like, oh, actually, I want to bring health clinics back in. If we bring health clinics back in, how much more does this enhance like our initiative, right? Or maybe not health clinics, maybe it needs to be local government, right? And so then you can kind of play around and you can filter this way with attributes, or you can also filter in this way. Filtering also allows you to filter by city or like your GIS mapping as well. So this is really helpful, right? For like if it's a national network or if you're looking at specific regions within a state. So you could say, well, actually, this initiative really is only going to take place in Mariposa County, right? So we're going to go ahead and look in that specific county, or, so really trying to hone in on different areas and how you can use this, this data. And then you have just like your map settings, right? So you can show isolates, you don't have to. You can pin your nodes so they don't move around. You can change this, like the space between them, your different colors of labels or lines. So if you wanted to kind of brand your map to be your colors with, different line colors, we typically do like a light gray. But the one thing that I like about this details area is this either details or ego map. So before, when I clicked on it and I got this detail box, if you change this over to ego map, you can go and then you get their ego map. So now you get an ego map of this organization and you're just looking at who they're connected to and who's connected to their partners, right? So this is like this is their little ecosystem, right? So then you can see, okay, is this organization in a community that's well connected, right? Are their partners connected to each other, or are they the connector, right? So then you can start to play around, or you can do this with your own organization, right? Click on it and say, what does my ego map look like? It takes the ego map and the member profile, like that next step, because you can filter by the different relational questions, right? So again, I'm still currently looking at a policy network, right? But I can change this to level of intensity. I can change this to any of my relational questions. And so you really are kind of like the driver of what you want to see in this map or what story you want to tell. And we're here to help you kind of navigate what story that might be or how your data can help you tell that story. So I might have gone a little over in this little part, but we do have some a next step here to kind of see if you have your data open, if you have your analyzer open. We have a little activity for this next part, but feel free to ask questions while we're doing this next part as well. And I'm happy to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. So yes, we have a little activity We know that analyzer can be daunting. There's a lot of wonderful things that you can do. And also sometimes it's nice to just start somewhere. So we want to give you the opportunity to apply something that you've just learned by going into your partner account. And whether you choose to play with your own data or the sandbox, we're going to share with you a little scavenger hunt worksheet. Let me drop it in. Let me know if you can't access it. And this worksheet essentially includes some topics and areas with data points that can be found within Analyzer. So we'll be spending the next few minutes on this, let's say about 7 minutes. Please ask questions either out loud or in the chat. Let us know if you're having any troubles. We really want to give you the opportunity to try to see if you can find anything with the worksheet, and for us to be here as a resource to help you if you have any questions.
And if you have other questions that you want to ask right now too, feel free. It's always helpful to kind of hear how you all want to use the data too.
I'm looking at our data and we have some that have the names attached to the nodes and some with just the number on the same map. Why would that be?
For that situation, I'm guessing that you had what we call like a name generator question in your survey. And so if someone was added to their what we call the network member selection question by a partner, then how they were added is what was kind of the system uses that same name as their short name because they're kind of created in that moment. There is a way to go into your member area and update any of that information. You can update the short names for those folks. While we're everybody's kind of looking, I can quickly show that real quick just so that you can see, and I can keep my little partner area alive here. It won't log me out. But in your members area, you have your respondents, those who were added by respondents, and then what's called resources. Resources are more applicable for our partner me work. So you can probably ignore that tab. But if in your project, I'm guessing there's some folks that are in this added by respondents area. And if you go, it won't let me click in that area, but if you click in that area, you're able to kind of select any of those organizations and you can edit them. And then from there, you're able to change out a short name or a map label name.
Okay, thank
And
you
we
so
can,
much.
yeah, and we can help you through that if you need to. But yeah, and for those who may have like who may have de-identified map labels at the moment, or have some that are or are identifiable and you want to de-identify them, this is again where you would go and kind of make those edits. Maybe there's certain people you want to identify and some you don't, right? If there's key players, you want their, their name to be shown full, like in a full way, so then you can take a nice snapshot of it and then you can go back and change it later if you needed to. So there is some flexibility in the system, right, and how you label them.
I do have another question, but it's a little bit off topic from the scavenger hunt elements. Is that okay?
Yes, yeah, feel free.
So one thing that has tripped up in the analyzer when I'm in the network map is playing around with the filters. And I feel like I must be doing something wrong. But when I try to look at the network and filter for a specific county, if I deselect the other 3 counties and I only keep 1 county, like the data disappears, it's blank. So I know I'm doing something wrong and I cannot figure out what. So can you just, show me how you would filter for like a county?
So is I'm guessing county might be one, like an attribute that you have on your,
Yep.
okay. So so in that situation, so like I'll use city here for an example. And right now you'll see here, if it says 0 out of 59, then it's showing me nothing, right? And it's probably because
Right.
something's filtered off. So if I go back and select here, it will show me everything again. So right now I'm going to deselect everything and say I only want to see those that are working in Bozeman, right? And so then it's going to show me that map. We can look at your data. There might be something like a tag that might be offer something, but
Okay.
for the, yeah,
Maybe
we'll
we
look
can
into
take it offline, maybe.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
because yeah, because you can definitely be able to easily, you know, say, hey, yeah, this is my Big Sky in Belgrade network, right? And just those folks, and then filter on. But yeah, you can filter by any of your current attributes or addresses. We will also, and so I think we'll move on for the sake of time because we have some wonderful scenarios to get through. But if you have questions or if you are working through this later and you're like, wait, I don't remember where this was, or I don't know how to find this, or I'd rather find this in the raw data, let us know, and you know, we'll let you know where you can locate that. We want to walk through about 3 different scenarios of different ways or different things that might come up in a typical network. It might not necessarily be something that might happen specifically with your network, but there might be some similarities or some common themes, right? About like a key player or looking for ways to, you know, track networks over time, right? So we'll go ahead and get started.
Yes, so you guys can follow along with your data, or if you want to just sit back and observe, that's fine too. So just jumping into scenario 1, important roles members play. So let's imagine you got word that the contact at the state agency who has worked closely with your network for years is leaving or retiring. And the new person representing that organization does not want to stay as involved as the last person because the organization will have new strategic aims. So now you look and see that this organization is a key player and is connected to over half of the network.
Then we're going to go into let's walk through that using partner, right? So we kind of touched on that a little bit when I was walking through this, but when you go here and you say, okay, I just got word that our Board of Cooperative Education Services, right, kind of our state agency is, our contact is retiring. And so we're like, oh no, right? They are connected to 63% of the network. They have 24 people, you know, 24 organizations who are, you know, call them a partner, and, you know, they selected 26. So in your mind, you're thinking, okay, if this new contact does not take the same level of commitment or the same level of involvement in this work, how is my network, how is the work of, you know, of our initiative going to change, right, with this new contact? And so when you go into this data, you can, again, see, are they a key player? Because maybe they're one of these folks down here and you're like, oh, okay, well, you know, it might not be too big of a drastic change, but if they're connected to a lot of your network, so a new contact could be a drastic change, right? Personalities may not jive the same way that they did with the last contact. But then you can go look and see, well, are they valued? Oh, they're, you know, that's over a 3, that's very positive. They're really valued. Oh, they're even more trusted. You know, their partners even perceive them as really trusted. So they are a really important part of the networks. Okay, so how can we make this a smooth transition for this new contact? How can we help them out? So when you go to your network map, one thing you can do initially too is kind of see, okay, when I'm just looking at my total network, right? If I take them out, is my network going to fall apart? Oof, no, they're all still connected. That's really good, right? Because then if all of a sudden you took them out and it was disjointed, then it would be really concerning to be like, oh no, like we really need to make sure that this is a smooth transition, or that they're connected to two distinct parts of our network, and how can we better bridge those parts together? So then you can go in and you can say, okay, I'm going to bring them back in, and I'm going to kind of look at their ego map, right? I'm going to see who are they connected with, and how can I make this smooth for them? And then you see, okay, they do have a really large network, right? So like, how am I going to really manage this? So I was trying to zoom in to make it a little easier, and then so I'm going to move my little arrows. I'm going to zoom this out, and then I need to find my little zoom controls. So then you can kind of see here, okay, this is my organization that I'm trying to, when you do pin the nodes, I forgot to mention, when you do pin the nodes, you are able to kind of move nodes around a little bit. So if you wanted to kind of get a snapshot of a specific story that you're saying or that you're trying to tell, right, between like that policy network, you can move nodes around and then, push this button and it will download a PNG for you of the current state of the network map. So when I click on them, go back into here to my data options, but I want to actually go into I can see that, yes, they are in a well-coordinated system. So if they leave or if this contact leaves, this little ecosystem may fall apart, right? And it could be interesting, but it can see that, I guess without them, it actually does sustain, right? We can take them apart, we can play with it. And so that's really interesting to be able to filter out. But if you say, hey, if this key player, maybe they don't connect with early childhood as well anymore. Ooh, okay, well then their network kind of shifts a little bit, but what happens to all those early childhood connections that they had before, right? Another way that you can look at this is you can go into their details as well, and you can view their member profile, and then you can give that to the new contact and say, hey, these are the partners that your organization has been connected with in the past. This is the type of contributions you've been willing to contribute in the past. You see this changing. So you can use this member profile as a conversation starter with that new contact and kind of get them up to speed on what's happening in the network and how their organization has played a role in the network. So there's, so I'm going to pop back over to our PowerPoint here, but.
Yes, so the key terms that we just covered in scenario 1 are key player and degree centrality. So a key player is a member of the system who is connected to most of the network. The networking can heavily rely on these key players. So if they're no longer participating in the network, there is a risk that the system may not function as effectively. Degree centrality is the percentage of partners connected to an organization ingoing and outgoing, a measure of a node's activity or popularity in the network. A node with a high degree centrality score may be very active in forming relationships with other nodes and or may be a popular partner with which to connect. Such a node may act as an opinion leader or an influencer in the network, and they may possess more information than others about the network simply because of its greater number of connections to others. Degree centrality scores are best judged on a scale relative to the range of other scores in a particular network. The maximum degree centrality score is always the total number of nodes in a network -1 because a node can't be connected to itself, and the minimum score is always 0.
So that's one thing that we always get in network surveys sometimes is when a respondent, they'll always flag the coordinator and say, wait, you had this network survey, but my organization's not in it. And it's always because from their perspective, they're not going to see their organization in the list of partners to choose from. And so it's always an interesting thing because yes, always good to reassure them that of course they're in there, right? And yes, Caroline.
Sorry, I'm really embracing you asking.
Yes, no, please.
questions.
I wanted to be interactive. Yes, please.
This key player thing seems super interesting to me. In our network, one thing we're trying to understand is who is acting as a hub
Mm-hmm.
in there across the region, right? Like there's going to be multiple hubs, and strategically, those are the ones we really want to work with. But what I feel like I didn't quite grasp, Sarah, is it seems like the key player is kind of secondary data that you've added in the partner platform. Like if the survey was the primary data, you're not asking people to self-identify as a key player. You've kind of made that determination. So where did you add that data? Like if I want to add,
Right.
ooh, this organization seems like a hub to me, where do I add that tag? And then how do I see it in the analysis?
Good point. We're going to get to how to add tags in scenario 3. So I'll slightly put a pin on how to add it.
Yep.
Add
I
that
will wait.
part. But I will say that for degree centrality, you were right. Like we did add that as a new attribute because I wanted to be able to quickly filter them in and out of the system. But the degree centrality or key player is just another way of kind of saying like the person who has the most degree centrality, right? So and that score is just is not yet, you're correct, not calculated from a specifically asked in the survey question, but it is calculated from that network member selection question. So depending on how many partners they pick or how many they're picked, that question is used to calculate, you know, the density score, the degree centrality, and in and out and things. But yes, that's we will get to how to tag that because it is a very good point and how you can definitely use your data over time. Yes, Fred.
A quick question. Have you seen, what have you seen in the past for other people that have done the survey, how they present this info in these maps to key players and talk about the role they played? Now, you just talked about that as a, you know, if somebody was pulling out, but just as either, not as a warning of what happens if you leave, but more of an encouragement, or here's what it is, or for them to kind of buy in to their own role.
Yeah.
Do people actually sit down and do they do a kind of a live demo and show them? What have you seen in terms of how people have used this?
So it really depends, right, on what you want to do, right? Like you can sit down with that key player and show them and like work with them in the data in real time. You can give that network member, that key player, collaborator access on your data, and give them read-only access, so they can only see things on the in the analyzer. They won't be able to like make edits to the member area or change anything survey-wise, but they can access the analyzer. There is also ways that we can copy projects and put them into like another project into your account, right? And then you can kind of remove specific questions or data points that you don't necessarily want others to access. And then you can kind of do the same thing, give them collaborator access onto that analyzer, and then they can play with the data that you're allowing them to see, right? The other thing is like I mentioned, print out their member profile and just have a conversation with them, like take them out to coffee and say, hey, you have a lot of connectivity in this topic area, right? Like, how can we make sure that we're, I mean, not saying that, you know, but like in your mind, you want to be able to leverage the position that partner may play, because if you want to share new information, or if you have a new initiative that you want to launch and it might be controversial in a way or somewhat, you want someone who's going to have a lot of connections who might be your champion for that, right? So you want to turn to those key players and say, hey, how can we rally the troops and get people really excited about what we're going to do? And since you like reach most of the network, you know, I'm leaning on you to help spread that word, help spread the information, right? Or help get people on board. So I think there's ways that you can use it in different ways too. And we can talk more about that, Fred, too, as well.
All right, so we do have some recommendations on network management. So here are a few key questions. Which network members have the highest degree centrality scores? What do you think will happen if this organization leaves or cut ties to certain types of organizations? Comparing the degree centrality and your value scores, do those same members score high on both metrics? Do they also have high individual trust and degree centrality? Here are some strategic action steps that you can take. Organizations with high scores on multiple metrics may be particularly advantageous partners and important members to retain within the network. And I think we do have a question from Miranda. You want to go ahead and ask it?
Yeah, no, I was just touching back on what Sarah had just said. All of that information, is it available somewhere on the site, or do we need to reach out to you personally?
For the key players?
Yes.
Oh, you'll be able to find that when you go into so when you go into your network scores area, you can find that in the individual scores, and you can sort by the degree centrality. So that, and again, a degree, your key player is going to be those who have the highest degree centrality.
And then everything Fred just spoke about, we can find on the site somewhere? Is there like an info about like link?
Yeah. Well, and in terms of like being able to like pull up member profiles, yeah, definitely. We have some articles and like walkthroughs in different ways. And we're actually at the end of this, there's some tools and tips that we're going to be sharing out. And one of those has like an information sheet on how to access your member profiles. So if you needed to pull those up, or if you needed to access, any of these scores or network maps as well.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. So I'll just quick because sorry, we had one more action step, I think, to release.
Yeah, so the last action step is identifying if it is more important that the new contact maintains the same level of connectivity to the network. If it is important, just take the time to integrate that new contact into network meetings and bring them up to speed on the work being carried out and their organization's role in the network success.
Awesome. So now that we experienced scenario one, let's talk through another scenario where you would want to leverage using your member profiles. So imagine you're going to a community meeting with some network members you're not as familiar with to discuss a new initiative or intervention for the network. You want to walk into the meeting as prepared as possible on how to integrate this new initiative into the network. So you look up the member profiles for each of the attending organizational partners, and using the network map, you realize that there's a critical partner who is not invited. So Sarah will now walk you through this scenario in turn.
Yeah. So going back to kind of my network map here. So what's really interesting on this piece as well, one thing, again, you can always use your network score to kind of say, okay, I'm inviting, early childhood 1 and Department of Service 3. And I want to kind of see, do they have a good level of involvement? Are they able to be involved in this initiative? Are they able to contribute resources, right, to help this initiative go? Maybe we need someone who has the most power and influence at the table to kind of help push this forward, right? So use these scores to kind of help make determinations of who should be involved in which ways, right? So one thing that comes up with value, right, is like usually it's always, again, the power and influential person who's like seen as the one who like should lead things or that should take charge, but oftentimes they may not always have a good level of involvement, or they might not have the time to, right? Or they might not be able to contribute resources. So be able to really look at how you can leverage the different value that members bring, I think is really important, especially when you're trying to launch new initiatives or maybe try a new intervention, or you're just really trying to see, or shake things up a little bit too, right? And see like who's going to be the one who's going to be the most open to discussion about this new thing, and who's going to be the one that's going to fight me on it, right? Like who's going to be the one that we might have to pull aside and have a separate conversation first to kind of get them on board, right, before we bring it to the whole group. So these scores are really important to use in like those action step ways. But going back to kind of our scenario here. So if you're saying, okay, I again have my, I'm going to go back to kind of my advocacy network here, because we're going to launch this new policy initiative. Let me just deselect these folks. And then I noticed here, again, I wanted to say, so I also think of these relational questions and these non-relational questions as kind of like baking a cupcake, right? So like your relational questions are going to be your cake, right? Like what do you want your cake to be made of? What do you want the line to show? And then the frosting is kind of like, what do you want those halos to represent? So you can make all sorts of different kinds of cupcakes, right? With all sorts of different frostings and flavors. And so really just kind of figuring out what's the best, right, cupcake for your story at the moment. For our story right now in this scenario, it's this advocacy network. And let me scroll back up here. Apologies, I'm working on a big screen, so I want to make sure it's visible for you all, but then I also want to make it Okay, so I can see here that this is my policy network. And we invited, these key players because we knew that they were going to be part of it. But I noticed that this Head Start organization is not invited, right, to our meeting that we're going to be launching this new initiative. And I noticed that where'd he go? My Head Start guy down here, he's connected to this other Head Start, but they're the only ones connected to them, right? So just kind of highlighting that, hey, this person's connected to another group, or maybe this Head Start's in a different county or a different region of the state, right? And so by not including this Head Start, we're risking not, representing a population, right, that we need to serve, or that we need to make sure that we're representing appropriately, right, in this initiative. And so I say using the data to be able to identify, hey, who should we invite to the meeting to begin with, right? If we're going to have a meeting about this new advocacy initiative, who should we invite? I would say we would invite everybody who says they can contribute that type of role to the network, invite them, and then make sure that if there's anybody else who is at risk of or is connected to maybe a specific population or a specific region, or is a specific sector, right, that's not represented by these other players, that you bring them into the table, or that you bring them into the meeting. And so, like we mentioned, you can easily pull up network profiles for folks. So say this early childhood is going to be coming to our event. So I'm going to go to their member profile, and I'm going to pull up specifically information about them so that I can see, does this organization have write down, do they have the value, are they valued by their partners, right? Are they seen as influential? Do they have a good level of involvement? If it's all positive, right, then you're like, ooh, but if you say, oh, maybe this organization that we're bringing to the table to this meeting has a really low open to discussion score. So they might kind of, they might be playing devil's advocate in the meeting, right? They might be pushing or challenging us in certain ways. And so you can prepare yourself for that, right? To say, maybe, how can we prepare for maybe a disruption in the flow, right? Or we know that everybody's all in. We have, this whole group is committed, they're reliable, they support our mission, so like you can go into that meeting and that we can get some work done, right? Like we're all here to work on the same thing. Then you can kind of see how they answer different survey questions, like what they might be able to contribute. So like if you're in the meeting and you're say, hey, we're going to need some funding for this, so we might need some some space to hold an event, right? And then you can look at the member profile and you can see, did they say that they could share that kind of contribution? Sometimes they can provide a fiscal management, or sometimes they do have like an in-kind resource, like staff or buildings that they can share, or volunteers, right, for an event. So being able, and then hold them accountable to say, well, you actually said you could contribute this, so is it that changed, right? Like if it's changed, well, let's update that. If that has changed, let's make sure that this is like kind of our record, right, of like what you can contribute to the network, because we're using this as an inventory, right? So bringing these profiles to the event, sharing them with your members is also really important too, to kind of, so that they can see how, what role they play, right? Or how they answered, or who they're connected to. There are ways for you to save this PDF. You're also able to edit some information. And when you hit edit, it will take you to actually edit information about that that member. So if you said, oh, actually their name is spelled wrong, oh my goodness, I'm gonna update that, we need to fix that. So we're gonna fix that and we're gonna save it. And so then now that that member contact has been updated and it's changed for you. And so that's a really great way. You can also really just quickly, if you just wanted to print out network maps, there's a way to just look at just those. There's a way to just look at just survey answers, or to look at just scores. And so if you didn't want all the other things, you can focus on specific pieces of the member profile. And then also when you go into your settings here, you're able to customize these member profiles. So if for one event you want to pull up specific survey information, you can include that here. If for another event you want to take out the value scores, you can delete that and add it later, right? So you can edit your member profiles as well. So yeah, so we recommend, pulling up member profiles for like meetings, or if you're going to go have coffee with that person or that key player, right? Pull up their member profile and use it as a conversation, as a starting point, as a way to hold them accountable, as a way to leverage what their organization can contribute to the broader network. You can also access member profiles from the member area as well. So when you go here, if you just click on any member, it will take you to them. And you can also like search. So if I wanted to like search for anybody here, it will count on that, and then you can click on it and it will take you again right to their member profile. You can save it as a PDF and you can print it from there. So we're going to jump right into the last scenario here.
As we mentioned earlier, we have an interpretation guide that you can use that includes all these key terms that we use. More specifically for this specific scenario, the terms that are really important to understand are overall value, which measures how much members value one another. And this measure, this is measured by capturing members' perceptions amongst 3 dimensions, which are power and influence, level of involvement, and resource contribution. Power and influence measures essentially how much an organization is perceived to hold a prominent position in the community and how much it shows leadership. Level of involvement measures how much an organization is perceived to be involved in the community and how much the organization gets things done. And then finally, we have resource contribution, which measures essentially how much an organization is perceived to contribute resources to the community, like funding, expertise, etc. And then at the bottom, we have interpretation that you can refer back to, which highlights how scores of at least 3 out of 4 are considered good scores, and anything under 3 can indicate an area of growth for the organization. It's important to remember that these scores are a combination of the 3 dimensions, but note that each score is also considered equally as important.
Mm-hmm.
And then additionally, we also have reviewed overall trust, which measures how much members trust one another. I think it's important to remember sometimes that it's how other people perceive people. So sometimes people can take their trust scores and take it personally, but it's an opportunity for growth. We become more aware within the communities. So this is measured by capturing members' perceptions amongst our 3 dimensions, which are reliability, mission alignment, and openness to discussion. Reliability measures how organizations is perceived to follow through on their commitments. Mission alignment measures organizations being committed to the shared mission and goal of the network. And openness discussion, which measures how an organization is perceived to have a willingness to engage in frank discussions and consider other viewpoints, which Sarah has mentioned earlier, in a professional manner. And then again, for interpretation, we have the scores. They're out of 4. Anything higher than 3 is considered good. Anything less can indicate area for growth. And then as far as leveraging your member profiles, they can be downloaded in advance of community meetings, as we mentioned in the scenario, or gatherings to give you a quick reference guide to each partner and their place in the network. This can help guide your efforts to build new relationships, leverage existing contacts, and avoid creating redundant partnerships. And then you can also share profiles with partners to use themselves as a map of their network with the member profiles. This can be a powerful tool for engaging them in the network tracking process and provide a tangible resource and benefit to drive involvement in future surveys and projects. It's also really helpful for demonstrating an organization's connectedness to community members, funders, and other key stakeholders. We think offering respondents member profiles is really a great way to share their data back to them, which a lot of surveys don't do. And it's cool to see how other people perceived you in the network. And then we have our recommendations on network management. So we have these key questions that are really great to initiate some thoughtful conversations around members connected to hard to reach members, contributing unique resources. Are they aligned with the mission of the network? And are they perceived to contribute resources or have a high level of involvement? And then finally, we have some of our recommendations for strategic action steps to include identifying network members with the highest individual value scores, and making sure that these members' strengths are properly leveraged, considering whether the high score is more a reflection of the overall organization or the individual organizational representative, or both. And then when interpreting value scores, it is important to know that the number of partners who chose them is more correlated to those scores than who the member picked, which we kind of showed in those network scores in the analyzer, the in and out. If a member has lower value scores, they may need to be engaging in more ways with other members.
Yeah, and that's brought up a good point there too. Consider going back to like our, turnover question or scenario, right? Like, is the score more of a reflection of the organization or the contact or both, right? And one thing to think about is if you go and you may know that there might be a contact at an organization that, just doesn't get along with others, or maybe is hard to connect with, or is just really busy. Maybe they're not the right contact for that organization. So it could be an interesting way to like look at that score too, to say, well, we need that health department in our network, but maybe the ED is not the right person to be at the table. Maybe it's a program manager, maybe it's someone else, right? Like, how can we get more active participation? So being able to look at that score and make a determination too on who should be at the table to represent that organization too. Yes, Fred.
Just a quick question. This may just have to do with us, but others, it may be relevant for you as well. We've got like horrible value scores, but we have like 200 respondents, and it's for people, it's really, it's a network of networks. There's lots of different networks that we were measuring, coalitions that we were measuring. So is that something that we would expect to see? And are there ways to kind of shrink the kind of relevant like coalition score to see that we would see higher values than for people who are only responding from within that coalition? Is that where we go on that to find that data? Okay.
Yeah, Fred, we can work with you on that because you have an interesting use case in your data. So yeah, you would go to that relational tab, and then we would sort by, the tail for that network, right? And then we would go to see, what specific, how people specifically rated that network. So we can dive deeper into that with you to show you.
But that's basically, it's getting diluted. The scores are getting diluted because there's so many overall respondents on that. Is that why the value scores would show a lot of zeros, actually?
Oh, well, in that sense, well, if there's a lot of, then people just didn't answer that question, right? Yeah. So but the scores won't won't include those zeros into the average. So it is only averaging the data that is available. So if people didn't answer, or they skipped that question, it's not going to dilute the data in that way. But so that it is the value score out of like the out of all the responses that were gathered for those questions, right? And so as we saw in the raw data, there are some missing. So it's not necessarily 100%. We can work with you specifically on like what what data might like where to find that for those specific coalitions at your level. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And it's okay if scores are low, right? Like, it's just an opportunity, and especially at a baseline, right? People may not know how to leverage each other's value, or they may not know about each other. So one thing, especially if like the resource contribution scores are low, what we typically will do is do like a resource inventory, and then we say, you may not know what others in this network can contribute, right? Like, leverage the awesomeness that you all bring to this network, right? So they don't need to go through you necessarily as the hub, right? Like, you want them to say, hey, I need help with like specific help on mental health or behavioral health. Who in my network contributes that type of expertise or that type of contribution. And I just want to go and, connect with them. So I'm just going to connect with the behavioral health group myself, right? Because I know that they said they can contribute that. And so it's just bringing awareness to the network too on what members can contribute, right? And then they're able to better leverage that. And then I would bet, right, that score would increase over time the more that that awareness increases as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Here, I'll go ahead and I think it will go to the next slide. There we go.
All right, so let's dive into our last scenario, tracking network information over time. So imagine you hosted that meeting in scenario 2 and you want to track who said they anticipate they would be willing to help with the new initiative and other notes from the meeting. Once the initiative is launched, you want to see how that intervention impacted partnerships within the network. Now you add a new attribute to track the level of involvement the member anticipated contributing. And you add a notes attribute to track your notes from the meeting. When ready, you set up and launch a new project to collect data on how the new initiative has impacted the network.
Okay, so this is our last scenario, and I'm going to walk through, and this kind of gets at what you were asking about and just a little bit ago, Caroline. So in your settings area, so if I go back to my home screen here, go back to my collaborations. Didn't mean to go back to my home screen. But here you have your settings tab, and there's a couple places, 2 places where you can manage attributes. One is in your settings area, and this is where you're going to add the attributes. And so you can see here, there's this little tab here that says manage attributes. And so say I wanted to add an attribute, and you can choose whether it's a date and a time. So if you wanted to say who attended the specific meeting, or if you wanted to just, again, write notes. So I'm going to add an attribute, and I'm going to call it, the November 18th meeting notes. And I'm going to save that as an open-ended attribute. And then I'm also going to save a single select attribute as the level of participation that we think that this organization said that they could contribute, right? Participation for this new initiative. And so we're going to say like little, some, and a lot, just for the sake of this scenario. And then I'm going to save that. And so now these are new attributes into my CPRM. So then when I go back into my members area, this is where I can assign attributes to members, or I can also select them and then type in that note information. So for example, if I go into assign attributes, and to your comment earlier, Caroline, what I ended up doing is I went into my org type and I just created a new field that said key player, and then I saved my attribute. And then I went over into my, and I always like to show all because then I don't have to select through everything. Down just a bit here, scroll over. So these are all the attributes that were now like the level of participation in my November meeting notes, as well as the other ones that we have added, like org type right here too. So if I went back and I wanted to say, well, actually, I got this wrong, and they're not local government, they're actually, a regional alliance, you can go and update your attributes here as well. You can bulk add. So if you wanted to say anybody who, well, I guess that was not good because they only had one person with family. But if I want to do anyone that had like, that deals with childcare, and I want them to say that they were all going to do, I got to select all, and I'm going to bulk assign them all with some level of participation, because that's what they said they could contribute to that meeting. Now it's going to assign that. It's thinking. There it is. Stop it.
And what's the difference between an attribute and a tag?
So, a tag is something that's mostly assigned to a response option. So we use tags a lot for our partner me work. And so for this situation, like a tag would be used if I wanted to have a specific type of resource show up if a respondent clicks a certain need. So like if they selected they needed help with childcare, I would upload a list of resources and then I would tag them as being able to help with that need. So tags are a little different for right now. They won't necessarily apply too much for your CPRM work. You'll probably mostly be working in the attributes area because tags are assigned to questions in the survey, whereas attributes are assigned to the nodes in the network, your members. So, so now they're all tagged right here, but I can also go into, if I didn't want to search, and I just wanted to go back into my member area. And again, I was just saying that that's, oops, go back here, members that I had my, was this guy, the Board of Cooperative Education. He was, right, he's our key player, he's leaving, he's also doing a bunch of things, right? So if I wanted to go into his member profile and the meeting just ended, right? So the meeting just ended and I go into the platform and I pull up his profile and I'm gonna go into here and I'm gonna edit it. And I'm gonna say, okay, here's my notes. So seemed a little, excited for the new work. So I can't type new work, but does not know how much time they can contribute, right? So that's my meeting notes. They say have a little bit of some participation. So I'm gonna, might update that to a little, right? They're my key player. You can update any other attributes. You can update other information. And then I'm gonna save that right here where it says, here's my meeting notes for that day. And so now I can keep track of what happened, what's going on. And then, you can keep adding these notes. You can keep adding additional attributes. You can track this over time. You can add in, different multi-select or single select attributes. Another option that you could do if you wanted to update the data, right? Say 6 months has passed and you're about to hold a really big community event, right? Where most of the members are going to be participating or be involved in, and you know that there's going to be a lot of connectivity happening. Your survey never closes, right? Like it's living, it's a living data set, right? You can send your link out again and say, what are there any connections that you just formed that we want to update? Is there anything that you want to change or update about this information? And at that point, what I would suggest is you always download your raw data, right, and timestamp it. So you would download your data that was, 11/18/2022, and I'm timestamping the network, and that's the data. And then if I wanted to have folks go in and update information, or if I knew that connectivity changed or something and you wanted to update some information, you could update that and then re-download your raw data and timestamp it with, update, 11/20/2022, right? Just note that if you wanted to kind of track a new initiative, right, how that new intervention changed things, what we would suggest is that you would just create a new project, and you can easily just create a new project, say, test one, right? I'm going to create it. I'm going to save it. And then you can easily download your member data from your previous project, use that as your member list for your next project, copy your survey in, and then launch, right? And then collect that new data. And then you kind of have the two data sets, right? That you could manage and show. And we are working on comparative analysis and ways to show two networks in one space, right? So that is a good way to kind of show this is my network, you know, before the intervention, and then this is the network after the intervention. And so in that case, definitely do a new project, right? And then you can really show the change over time. But that's what's the best part about Partner CPRM, right? Is that that's what we're hoping you're able to do with it. But I'll go ahead and jump over to this because I know we're about at time. So if you need to jump off, feel free, and we're here to stay on for a few minutes.
So here are the terms we covered in that last scenario. So Sarah showed you the attributes, so you can assign each node an attribute. These attributes are used to identify a characteristic for each node. The attribute should be chosen based on what makes sense to each network. To define attributes, decide on categories and then type the attribute information for each node in the Manage Attributes area within the member section of your Partner CPRM. We also went over longitudinal analysis. So this is tracking and measuring your network data over time, noting how data has changed and how partnerships evolve over time. And then relationship budget. So this is the time and resources spent managing relationships to achieve the collaborative's goal. So you have the CPRM subscription feature. So you're able to pull up network data whenever you need it. You can pull up your member data whenever you need it, and you can showcase the network's connectivity for funding opportunities and track connectivity over time as it is happening. So here are some more recommendations for network management, some key questions to think about. What network activity do you want to track over time? And what ways do you anticipate a new intervention to change the network? When is the right time to conduct a follow-up or a second round of network data collection? And here are some action steps you can take. Consider what the new initiative may require from partners to implement, time, staffing, or funding. Think about the members' relationship, budgets, and if they have space in their budget to work on this new initiative. Partners within the community are likely already overwhelmed with meetings and the time needed to engage in cross-sector opportunities. So don't overwhelm partners with excessive invitations and requests.
So we recognize this is a lot of information to digest. We appreciate you all taking the time to meet with us and attend this workshop. We want to share some tools that you can take away and use that reflect not only what we covered today, but so much more. So essentially, Fred, you have a quick question?
Well, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I did want to ask one quick question at the end. So do you have is there a rule of thumb for a second round of timing? I realize each coalition's needs and things are different, but sometimes to give enough time for something in between,
Right.
not to leave it so long that it's apples and oranges, but not to make it so compressed that you don't really see much difference. So is there a rule of thumb that you use?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, because it's true, right? Systems change can be slow sometimes, right? Relationship building does take time. And so you do want to give ample time, right, for that to happen, right? Especially if you're measuring a specific intervention, you want to like let it take, have time to have fruition in the network, right, before you can measure its effectiveness. We do in this What's Next packet, we do offer, there's a section in there about to kind of answer that last question about when is a good time to kind of do a second round of data collection, or even a third round or a fourth round or whatnot. So that we'll share that out in there. Our colleagues, Marissa and Jenny on our data science team, wrote this wonderful blog that we kind of put into this packet as well. So yeah, you'll love that piece there.
Okay. So you're not going to answer the question now. That's fine. No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. That's fine.
There's a lot. There's a lot of good takeaways that they put in.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. Thank you.
Yeah, the What's Next packet actually has a lot of information around time two, using Analyzer, all of that. So keep an eye out in your email. We're hoping to try to get it out before the holiday, but with the holiday next week, it might likely be sent out the following week. We also have some facilitation worksheets that we want to send over to you to include the data scavenger hunt. And like you said, if you have any questions regarding any of those points, please feel free to reach out to us. We can follow up with you around that. We also have the social network analysis interpretation guide that has the password that you should only have to enter once And then additionally, we have our support hub. That's our website that we highly recommend bookmarking it on your favorite browser. And then finally, we really appreciate your partnership with us and hope that you found this workshop useful. So
Yeah.
we can open for questions.
And I appreciate if anybody has to jump off, feel free. We can stay on and answer any questions that you have. If you're able to scan the QR code or click on the link to give us some feedback on this workshop. We want to make these meaningful for you all and ways that we can improve or things that we can include in a future workshop as well. Because we understand that there's a lot that we can dive into here. So we only kind of did the top, the tip of the iceberg here. So any other questions from anybody? I know I'm glad that you asked it throughout the workshop too. That was really helpful.
Also, we do have a quick survey for you to share feedback if you're also interested in potentially another workshop, or if there's something that you wanted to bring up that we didn't have time to get to. Feel free to share it in there, and it doesn't take long. It's less than 5 minutes.
If nobody else has got a question, I've just got a question or two about reporting out to other people. So, okay, we've run this thing. And so again, this is for, I realize you want to be nuanced and have it all detailed, but you see repeating patterns on some things, I'm sure. I'm just curious on a couple of things from your experience with other networks, and they report out, what did people find most interesting and valuable? So, a coalition runs a survey like this, and then they share that with the participants who did it. What are people most leaning into? What did they report to you that they find most interesting? And so that feeds into the second question is, do you have any recommendations for as sharing a downloadable report with people, with respondents? Is there a version of that that people find, or in a live presentation? Is it a half-hour thing? Just any tips for that, for kind of presenting that to respondents to come back and share what's been learned with them?
Yeah, that's a really great questions. In terms of the sharing information out, I love this too, because in the What's Next packet, we are trying to include a section as well on ways that you can disseminate that data in different ways. You can create like a little one pager, right? You can use those member profiles. There's a way to do a respondent view of the member profile. And so on the respondent view of the profile, you can add in like bars, like you can add in graphics and charts from the whole network, as well as like individual level scores. And then you can send that out to participants with a link. And so it's similar to how you can send out like the survey invitation, but they'll get a link via the system, and then they can click on it, and then it will show them their individual profile. And in that individual profile, like I said, you can include some like network level charts and graphs or information in there, or network level takeaways, so that the respondents can see, where they like kind of their score, and then like maybe how it relates to like what happened overall. And so we can kind of give some examples on that. But yeah, there's lots of ways. There's also we've worked with some groups on like doing like social media toolkits, right? On like ways of just sharing out certain data points to like to highlight the work. Being able to and in your case, Fred, like we have those different coalitions, right? So like you could do like mini briefs on like what the work of that coalition is doing, and specifically hone in on that coalition. So we can talk more about that. In terms of finding most interesting, I mean, there's a lot in there. Like there's so much I think that people really lean into. I more than anything, like everybody always wants to know, right? Who are their key players? How are they going to impact the network? How can they share information? How can they leverage those resources? And so I know we're going to be doing a partner CPRM webinar in December, and so I think we might be able to touch on a little bit more of what those interesting things are too in that one. but we are planning on doing some more like thought leadership as well, like sharing out some of those findings. So we'll keep you all connected in that, because I think it is really interesting. We've been doing some like right now we're just working on a white paper around like COVID. A lot of networks in the last couple of years, right, have inserted a question or two in their network surveys about how COVID might have impacted their relationships. So recently in the last couple of years, right, that's kind of what people have been focusing on or really leaning into, is like, how can they either make the switch from hybrid to, or from in-person to virtual to hybrid back to in-person, you know, and all those things. So like that's been a really big thing for a lot of networks as well.
Okay.
Fred, did you already, is your report done, or are you, it's about to be done?
No, it's we have well, we have the report, the initial round of reports. I think we're waiting on some mapping stuff still. So I think we haven't gotten everything yet, and so it's really kind of anticipatory. Knowing how human beings are, I was guessing that the ego maps would tend to be things that people would be most interested in. It's like, what does my network look like, right? You know,
Yeah.
at that level is something that everybody is curious about. They want big picture, but they also want their picture, I'm guessing.
Well,
And
yeah,
Fred,
and
what?
go
Oh,
ahead.
I was just going to share what we did recently, Fred, because we scheduled a webinar with VNL, and Amanda joined us, and we recorded the webinar. And then we made sure that the individual level profiles that were scheduled to go out went out after the webinar. And then we included a link to the recording, a link to the report, and then a link to and so they had all the info there to play around with. Because to make sense of their individual level profile, they kind of need the list of organizations so that they can figure out who's who. I think that's the thing that's been like, they see the little ego map and they're like, oh, this is who is that? This is awesome, but who is that?
Right. Yeah.
But you know, the other thing, Fred, is like in our network, we ended up having 300 some organizations, like almost half of those were added by members. Only like 25 people showed up for the webinar. So I'm also realizing that like it's all about this follow-up dialogue based work now. And that's just the long road. And so that in terms of sharing out, I feel like that's where we're going to get the most bang for our buck. Just thought I'd share since we just recently went through this.
Yeah.
We're anticipating needing to do kind of, you know, when they're having their monthly coalition meetings or something, getting on the calendar, right, to say we got a 45-minute presentation, and then just along the way, when you send the resource packet out, is just figuring out what are those key pieces that people lean into when we start talking about, as opposed to eyes glazing with oversupplying too much detail that they're just not interested in.
Well, and I'll just say real quick, Caroline, because you mentioned this, that I can share. When you go into your member profile area, Caroline, for setting that up, if you added in a question, so the network member selection question, right, is the question where it has them pick their partners. If you include that question in your profile, you might be able to at least see some of the names, or help that might be some way for some folks to be able to see that information. Oh, I meant to show it in a different way, but if you go sorry, when you go down, if you add a profile block, you can add in specific survey questions, and that survey, so any like relational question, it will bring in those heads and those tails, right? It will tell you who's in their network. So I always think ego maps are really important too, Fred, in the sense that like some people might not know if others in their network are aware of each other, right? So like they're just kind of like in their own land, and they say, well, I'm connected to 30, I'm connected to 35 people, but are those 35 organizations also connected to each other, right? So like, as we noticed in my exercise, when I took out that key player in his own ego map, it didn't fall apart, because his ecosystem was really, connected. But if his ecosystem wasn't really connected and he was the connector, if they were to leave, that's when it would become disjointed. So it does get really interesting at the ego level for sure, and at that dyadic level. But I really appreciate all your questions. And if you have any more, please feel free to just email us, or, we're always happy to kind of jump on another call, or your recommendations might, be seen on a future workshop, right? If we didn't cover something, please let us know, or we're happy to kind of show you or walk you through where you can find that in your data, right? So thank you all for joining us, and have a good rest of your Friday and a good weekend.